Good morning, everyone. Here we are, April 17th, week 7 of the Developmental Disabilities Institute webinar series. I want to thank a core group of you who have participated very consistently. We have a group of about 45 people each week, so I appreciate everyone participating, and I've been looking at your competency, your homework, and I've been very impressed with the work that I've received. And I appreciate everyone getting that into us on time. Here's a quick reminder. Angela, at the end of her presentation today, is going to have her homework assignment ready for you, and we will need that by Tuesday at 5 p.m. So we are not accepting homework after that deadline, and it isn't fair to the other participants who do get their assignments in. Obviously, we recognize when people have extreme emergencies, we can make exceptions, but for the most part, we need to get you to complete the assignments in a timely fashion. And again, I appreciate everyone's consistent participation. A couple issues last week. A few of you noted some technical issues. Michael Bray has resolved some of those issues for us. It was only a few of you. They were the anomalies for the most part. Everyone else had easy accessibility. Quick word about the pre-tests. The pre-tests are really to assess how well we have put the training materials together. They're really to measure the learner objectives. They're not to measure, how well you've necessarily, improved over the course of the webinar series. So if you could do me a favor, I've noticed that some people are doing the pre and the post test at the same time, and that means we can't, they're going back and they're changing answers, so that means we can't really measure how much you learned in a training session, okay? So remember, no grades are associated with this. This is more for me to be able to grade what I taught you, okay, and what our guest lecturers taught you. So if I could ask that people would just do the pre-test, kind of put it away, then do the post-test after the training or the webinar series, that would be really helpful for us to measure with accuracy what people have actually learned from the learner objectives. So thank you. I'm trying to think here. I've made some notes for myself. Next week, Michael Bray is going to do week A, and his topic will be post-secondary educational experiences for students with disabilities. The last week will be Mr. Andre Robinson, and he will talk about advocacy and self-advocacy. So we are getting close here, and so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Angela Martin to you. She's a licensed social worker in Michigan. Angela's topic today will be legislative advocacy. She's worked at the Developmental Disabilities Institute for 15 years and is a community support specialist. She's been a recognized leader in projects that have advanced the quality of life for individuals with developmental disabilities. She was the project director for the Mount Pleasant Monitoring Project, making sure that as people left the last state institution in Mount Pleasant, they were transitioned to communities successfully. Angela led the statewide movement to promote self-determination for people with disabilities with the Michigan Partners for Freedom Initiative. She was also a founding member of the Sibling Leadership Network, a national organization that advances issues specific to siblings of people who have developmental disability. She remains on the board of directors and is passionate about advocacy and issues related to siblings. She also has extensive knowledge in policy and legislation that influences the lives of people with disabilities. And today she's going to share that expertise with you. So Angela.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for the introduction. I'd like to just start out by thanking folks for, as Elizabeth said, completing the homework or the pre-test. I apologize for not getting it out sooner, but I do appreciate people taking the time to do the pre-test, and hopefully throughout this presentation you'll gain some knowledge and participate in the legislative advocacy process. Sometimes this topic can be a bit unwieldy for people. They feel a little bit intimidated in talking to legislators, but one thing that I have seen both firsthand and got to participate in is when you get to talk to legislators and share your personal experience, either if you are a person that has a disability, a family member, or a person that works in the field supporting individuals with disabilities, sharing your direct experience with that is instrumental in making change and enhancing policy. So it's really key that as a community, a disability community, we are involved with the advocacy process. So to talk with your legislators is essential for improving how we get to support people with disabilities and also how the community of disability is supported. Here's an example of several local local community members from the Kalamazoo community who are meeting with their local legislator and through their what is called the Regional Inclusive Community Coalition, which is a sponsored initiative with the Developmental Disabilities Council. And each year they come together, all the RICs across the state, and it's hosted in Lansing by the Developmental Disabilities Council, and provide opportunities where legislators and legislative staff can meet directly with folks from their community who either have disabilities or who support people with disabilities. And that real casual environment provides an opportunity for somebody to sit down for a very short period of time, have a conversation with a legislator or legislative staff, and really share their knowledge about how they might approach a piece of pending legislation or a piece of legislation that could be improved upon. So that very first step is really key in making the issue known to the legislator and the legislative staff, but also that you get to share your direct experience. So before we get a little bit farther into it, I would like to take a little bit of a poll of our group and to kind of find out where we're starting from and maybe use this as a measurement to think about how involved. Sorry folks about that. My computer decided to not cooperate, so of course it happens on the presenter's computer, so I appreciate your patience. So as I was saying, I'm not sure where I got caught off, but that talking with legislators really is the impact where hearing from the citizens directly informs them how to make a policy position or what position they might change or how they might even approach a particular position. It doesn't, even a small experience of hearing knowledge from a citizen in their community really does have direct impact. So to have a little bit of interaction here, I'm going to really stretch the software today and try to do a poll and kind of see where we're starting from. So I'm going to invite you all to whoops, there. To invite you to participate in a short poll, just kind of see where we're at. So I'm going to ask you each to answer each one of those questions. First of all, starting with a real simple question, are you registered to vote? And as people are responding, that very first process of being involved in legislation is really the key piece, is that being a voter really does have an impact on whether or not a legislator is really going to be directly responsive to you after you actually registered to vote. So the next question is, did you vote in the last, and I'm going to kind of keep it somewhat simple by saying, did you vote in the last presidential election? So that would have been in November of 2012. We have a lot of elections in the cycle, and so having the ability to think about maybe a year and a half ago, the big elections are where most people vote. So looking at the next question, did you vote in the presidential election in November 2012? Give folks a chance to respond to that. Yep, people are responding. Looks like many of you did, which is great. Okay, and then we'll do the third question. Whoops. And our third question is, have you contacted your legislative officials in the last year? And I will let you decide what legislative officials. So yes, you did one time, yes, more than once, or no, not at all. Let's kind of see where we're at in terms of participatory process in the legislation. So it looks like, just from what I'm seeing early here, I know you guys can't see on the screen, so about half of you said no, which means there's a lot of opportunity based on your responses for where you could take today's information and kind of go forward and maybe take a little opportunity to interact with your legislators. So Elizabeth mentioned in our introductions that I have some homework. I really don't like that word, but it's some follow-up activities based on kind of some of this information that I hope you will take the opportunity to reach out to your legislators. So the post-presentation activity is really both based on following up with finding out more information about who your legislators are and your district information, and you'll have that information at the conclusion of today's webinar. So connecting with your legislators is really the first step. And here in Michigan, we have, obviously, the state legislature has its own website, and you can actually, oh, not being in my desk, I'm having a little bit of chair knowing how to do it. So clicking on the Michigan legislative website is an easy way to find what information is out there in terms of the policies that are currently pending. You can see certainly the schedules of the legislature and when particular pieces of legislation are coming up for meeting. Can I do this? And then we have the congressional legislator websites, both the House and the Senate, the U.S. House and Senate, and those are also, again, similar to a little bit different than the state legislative website, and that you are, the chambers are separated, but the links are connected. On the Michigan legislator website, we kind of have them both together, which is kind of nice. So you can either use either of those to find your legislator, find out who they are, and or get connected with them. So if we go, sorry, Mike. Going back to the website, if you see here the picture right up here in the right-hand corner is a picture of Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley and State Senator Rick Jones of Grand Ledge. What you see there is a recent signing of the legislation that to preserve the rights of citizens with developmental disabilities and their dignity by removing the word mental retardation and mentally retarded from state law. Those are not my words. Those are the old medical terms that we used to use to describe people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And from that, we've now had those words removed. It took a series of bills, but both these gentlemen are what's important to know is that they both have a personal connection to the language and that they're both family members. And it shows this that personal connection a legislator has with a topic really gets them connected to the policy or the proposed action, and can be really key in helping you to find a particular ally in some legislative advocacy. The other thing that's really important is finding out who your legislator is and where your district falls, because legislators are more responsive to who is their potential voter. So I mentioned those two websites, or the legislative website and the congressional websites. You can use those as opportunities to find out who is your representative, both on the House and Senate side, both in Michigan and in the congressional, U.S. congressional districts. But it's important to note that sometimes, every 10 years, we fill out a census form. And that thereafter the census is done every 10 years. That is also when we redistrict. I know for my own self, just after this particular census, my physical address of my house didn't move, but my congressional district changed. And it was a legislator, a congressional representative, who actually based on the redistricting of the congressional district, actually had now included my address again. So it's important, especially after we do a 10-year census, that to know that your legislator may change. And then to always kind of reference back so you know exactly which district you're falling into. And also helps with advocacy when talking to your congressional representatives. So here are two key resources. Michigan Citizens Guide to State Government is a guide that is available to all citizens. You can use it to get some more information about how the legislative process works. It's downloadable. It also has, it's available free online down on the web, and you can download it for, you know, for information, but also for to have access to information about your district. Then there's another document that I'm part of what's called Michigan Partners for Freedom. We're a statewide network of people trying to build demand for self-determination. And last year, we utilized a document that was produced by the California State Developmental Disabilities Council and took a document called Advocacy with Legislators that they had created and modified to reflect the Michigan experience. So this document is downloadable, and I will make these websites available to all the participants. But if you're looking for it, it's at the Michigan the Michigan Partners for Freedom website. And it's also written in plain and simple language so that people that that need some support in reading skills, that they actually can use it to have a greater understanding of how they can be involved. It uses icons and also some plain simple text so that it's really for a broad audience.
We can link it to the archive page too.
Oh,
all the links.
Okay. Mike's telling me we can archive all of this information at the website as well. So I asked you who you voted, and I noticed when we had the voting that not everyone had voted recently, but sometimes the other part that comes with redistricting of districts after the census is also that people's polling places change. So that where you voted last time might not be where you voted most recently. So it looks like a good number of you did, but it's not 100%. We'd love to see 100% of folks voting in the last election. So what I'd like to do is suggest that you click on, if you don't know where your current polling site is, and some of you may not have voted since the presidential election and may have forgotten, you can use what's called Michigan Vote. And Michigan Vote's a voter information center. This is also a great opportunity if you're helping people vote for the first time to find out if they're registered and where they're registered. Maybe they've moved since the last time they voted, and it also gives them an opportunity to find out if their registration's up to date with their current address, and also if they need to find where that polling place is. The other thing that is also available is that you can actually, when election season comes up, you can actually look at current polling equipment, so you know what you kind of prepare yourself for how you're going to be able to vote, and then also a particular ballot. So you actually can see the ballot before you go to the polling center. And for somebody like I do this myself, is that I find it somewhat, you're waiting in line and you're getting anxious sometimes and you feel like, oh, I just want to get this voting over with. I come with a prepared ballot. That way I don't forget what when I'm outside the balloting or the voting center, that I always, have a little bit more time to think about what I'm going to vote for or how I'm going to take a position. And so I just sometimes bring the completed ballot, and it's just basically copying it. It also is pretty important for somebody who might need assistance in voting, if they have assistance, to have it read to them outside, and then they can just simply go in, because I think it's pretty important to have that, citizen opportunity to go in and actually vote in the actual center yourself. You not always have to do a ballot by mail or absentee ballot. People want to go in and actually demonstrate that citizenship. So using the voter center to help people find out how they can be involved in the next elections. So the key question of knowing whether your constituent is important. It matters. Whether a legislator knows your constituent or not means you live in their district. You are responsive. They're responsive to you. Having said that, it also, we're all a general constituency in that we're all citizens, and we all, it's important to say that we vote. But it is a particularly higher connection when that individual legislator knows that you live in their district. They know that they need to be responsive to their that citizen. So when you are meeting with legislators or finding out as you're preparing to talk with them, let them know that you vote and that you live in their district. It really does have them have a higher sense of connection to you and listening very carefully to what their citizens and constituents are saying. Legislators also want to pay attention to what things are important by people telling them that it's important to them. So you need to let your legislators know what issues you're concerned with, and you can do this in a variety of ways. Meeting with your legislator, of course, in person is a great way. That's a personal one-to-one connection where they're seeing you, they're getting to ask you questions, and they're also getting to make that, that direct connection with a citizen from their community. Calling your legislator, talking with staff, talking with whomever might be, answering that phone and letting them know in a very small couple of minutes what you're calling for and what you would hope that person would take a position on, either for or against it, or maybe change the position altogether. Sending an email, and in this email I also kind of include not just emailing with, populating an email yourself. I'm going to show you in a little bit where there's an opportunity to have, a lot of advocacy groups now use software that can pre-populate an email on your behalf, where you can decide to either personalize it or send it as a general document. And that's often done through the internet, and they come out as emails. But it really is a quick and fast, relatively effortless opportunity to communicate with your legislator. And then the more traditional ways of either faxing, which is great, or mailing. And I will give you a cautionary tale about mailing. Mailing is great, but what you should know, and particularly when you're contacting federal legislators, is that mailing takes a exceptionally long time. Several years ago, many of you might recall the anthrax scare that happened in Congress. All mail that goes to the U.S. Congress now actually goes to an off-site center, is cleaned or whatever, made safe before it actually comes to the actual congressional offices. That's key in knowing that most pieces of legislation happen in a relatively, if they're on a fast track, sending something via mail, while I love the U.S. Postal Service, it can take quite a bit of time, and you might have missed the window. So sometimes that's not the most proficient and efficient way to get legislators to know what your position is or what you're asking of them. So I would suggest people think of some of the alternative, more higher tech, so to speak, including phone in that, ways besides a traditional mail. A letter is a great way to take some time and express yourself, but it may not be the most efficient way to reach out to a legislator. So here's an example of a letter that, and this is an email really, that a colleague of mine sent, and it really lays out in a very direct example of what he's telling. He sent this letter to Senator Stabenow, and this is my friend Ryan, and he's a really great advocate when it comes to meeting with legislators. He's really succinct and is a great, just a fun guy to be around. He's got a lot of experience in talking with legislators, so he's really shown me how to connect with people. But in a very few brief paragraphs, Ryan is expressing to Senator Stabenow what he wants her to focus on, and it's about self-determination in this particular letter. But he's showing how he has used the principles of self-determination to live the life that he's choosing to work to be involved in his community as a volunteer and a contributor, and some hopes and dreams, and he hopes that Senator Stabenow would really put this as a priority of her focus when considering future legislation. The other key thing that it did is he included a picture of himself, and when he does that, it really, you're looking at somebody. It's a lot harder to not focus on a message or listen to a particular issue when you're seeing somebody's face attached to that statement. So I encourage you to use pictures or snapshots when, or videos if people want to use videos, to really connect your contact with the person that's represented behind that communication. Here's an email that I got back from Senator Stabenow. Something that I've been really trying to help, along with so many others, trying to get the Senate to ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Senator Stabenow thankfully supported it when it came up for consideration in 2012. Unfortunately, it was not adopted by a very small margin of 5 votes. There is an opportunity for the ratification of the convention to come up again, hopefully this summer. But that consistent message of reinforcing it, even if it's not currently up for consideration, to make sure that your elected officials know that that is a priority for you and to continue to support it. This actually, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is a UN convention. The U.S. has not signed on to it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the convention at the end and kind of suggest an opportunity for many of you to get involved in supporting it. But I sent my letter to Senator Stabenow via email. It was really quick, couple statements about what my personal experience and knowing what others throughout the world who are experiencing disability, what their experiencing is, and why it's important for us as U.S. citizens to ratify this convention was so key. And I had to wait a little bit of time before I got my response, but Senator Stabenow was very good about following up. And usually when you should know is that whatever format you've used of communication you send, if it's email, you're probably going to get an email back. Sometimes you will get maybe a letter back if you phone called in or something. But generally speaking, if you send an email, you'll probably get an email response back from that legislator's office. It's usually a response in the same method. So just something to remember when considering that so-and-so may have not followed up with you or contacted back. So in preparation for your work in talking to legislators, you got to kind of do your homework, and you got to know what the bill proposes, and you got to think about how it will affect you. Here's a picture of the Barriger RIC, which is the Regional Inclusive Community Coalition in Barriger County, meeting with their legislator a couple summers ago at the Walk a Mile in My Shoes. And I know folks in the Barriger RIC have a strong collaboration and communication with their local legislators, talking to them regularly about how bills are affecting them and as bills kind of proceed through the legislative process. And that's been key, and I know in the RIC up there really talking about transportation is a key issue. So it's important to find out what a bill says, think about how it will affect you, and then communicate that back to the legislator. It's also important that you encourage, or when you're talking to legislators, tell them how you would like them to respond. It's not just enough to understand what it means and how it will affect you, but offer a position on what you would like that legislator to take, because that's really where the advocacy starts. So in thinking about how legislation proceeds, it's important to think about how our services and supports are funded so that we know where to kind of insert our ideas and experiences. This is a slide that I made several years ago, and I just use it because it's really helpful for me to think about how services and supports are funded, because that really influences how we can suggest to legislators to be involved in the process. So of course, we just had the wonderful April 15th day just passes by, which really is the action of where we collect all our taxes in this country. And in doing so, and as many as you probably begrudgingly either were happy to get a refund or begrudgingly sent a check, those dollars that we collect on April 15th are sent to the federal government. And from that, we send a majority of those dollars into our programs. And from that, the federal programs distribute most of those resources back to the states. And from the states to do that, they use that money to operate their state programs. In Michigan, when it comes to mental health supports, we have that funded under the Department of Community Health. The Department of Community Health uses those federal dollars to then fund what are called their local prepaid inpatient health plan programs and our community mental health supports. And those community mental health support programs facilitate mental health services and people that are the citizens that pay the taxes. Knowing all that is sometimes hard and complex to figure out where something falls. But to do a little bit of homework and think about how services and supports are funded or where a program is operated is really key, so that you, as a person advocating for legislative change, you know where to put your best effort. Putting in effort to a program that doesn't have jurisdiction over, or a legislator doesn't have jurisdiction, will give good advice and good input. But if you're advocating for a program that is operated somewhere else, it'll be hard for the legislator to take some action without knowing some background information. So where should you advocate does make a difference. If you're talking about most programs, it depends where the program is operated. If you want something to change on the federal level, and most programs that are federally operated, some that are federally operated solely at the federal level are examples that, such as Social Security. The state doesn't operate Social Security. We have Social Security offices in our state, but we don't operate that program. That's a federal program. There's also programs like the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That's a federal program where they tell the states what they can and can't do, but it's operated in Michigan through both DHS and the Department of Community Health. The DHS is the Department of Human Services. So sometimes there is a both situation. There are opportunities to both to think about where a program is both funded and programmatically delivered, so that you know where you should put your efforts of advocacy. So it does take a little bit of work to think about that, so that you know if you should be advocating for change or a position at the federal level with congressional district or congressional representatives, or at the state level with state legislature. So it can be a bit confusing. Sometimes they're operating in both situations. An example of that would be education. We have federally created special education agreements with each state, where we have special education rules that are promulgated, how states are supposed to fund special education. There's always a controversy that we don't fully fund it, but that there are rules about what the federal requirements are for special education. And then there's the state application. And in Michigan, that's particularly true, because in Michigan, we meet the state minimum of who's supposed to be served under state special education, serving kids up to the age through their 22nd, the 22nd birthday. But we actually take it a step further and say, if you remain eligible and need special education, you can continue that up to the age of 26. So there's an example where if you want a particular change of how a particular program is operating within special ed, it might be a rule in Michigan, but the federal funding might be at the federal level. So you have to think about that and kind of do some homework to think about where it might be important to put your effort. So I want to, if you're thinking about getting together with a group and having a meeting with a legislator or talking with it, it's important to do a little bit of pre-work, not only getting some facts about what the program is and how it's going to be facilitated and who you're going to contact, but you need to decide who's going to schedule the meeting, who's going to make the appointment, and then plan to have the meeting if you're going to meet with the person face-to-face. Reconfirm that appointment a couple days before. Think about who's going to talk about, do some research, what's going to be the issues that you're going to bring up, and then plan for notes based on what you're going to talk about. Realize that you might only have about 15 to 20 minutes with a legislator. That is a typical length of a meeting. And that 15 to 20 minutes can go quite quickly, especially if it's something you're passionate about. So you need to be brief and concise and often whittle down to what you want to focus on. You can't talk about everything, but you got to use your time wisely. So organize yourself in advance so that you're picking a couple issues to specifically focus on with that group. Now I'm going to show you a brief video here. This is from a meeting with some young people that the president had, obviously. These are young people with disabilities, and how they focused on and organized themselves to kind of demonstrate this point.
Down with young people with disabilities to discuss that future. Young people like student James Crane.
Hello, President Obama. It's such an honor to be speaking to you. Things that we've really been focusing on are unemployment and disability community. The other one is accessibility. We talked a little bit about the necessarily just make it just workshops, but maybe in integrated environments. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me.
Student Rachel Manis.
First of all, thank you for making disability recruitment and disability hiring one of the priorities for your administration. I think that it's amazing that the progress that this administration has made over the past several years.
Director of the White House Domestic Policy Council, Cecilia Munoz.
My vision for the future of disability policy is that it should be something that every part of the government thinks about and integrates into its work. We're measuring the results of the executive order signed by the President on employment for people with disabilities. In total, in fiscal year 2011, the federal government hired 18,738 people with disabilities. That means we're very close to being on track to fulfill the President's promise of hiring 100,000 persons with disabilities in 5 years.
Senior Advisor to the President, Valerie Jarrett.
And we know that a better future will only come from comprehensive and informed policies that will positively impact the lives of people with disabilities. That's why President Obama will continue to invest in the education of children with disabilities, increased employment opportunities, better health care, and improved services that provide people with disabilities the opportunity to live and thrive in their own communities.
Student Allie Kennington.
I guess we've talked about so many of these issues, right? Education, employment, healthcare, what have you. But what I think needs to happen is a change of mindset, right? That disability is a part of the beauty of the diversity of this country.
You know, you guys are great ambassadors and testimony to the power of a mindset that says, they're very keen, they're very keen.
So that was just a quick example of how, you know, even as the students, the young people with disabilities identified all the challenges that many students might face or experience, employment needs, support for a successful education. I know Mike's going to talk about that next week's webinar. Transportation. You only have a certain amount of time, so especially when you're in a group that large and you really have, you know, the complex needs of individuals with disabilities, there's a lot to talk about, and you want to cover it all, but you have to work within that parameter of what you actually have in terms of time and what's going to be the priority. So some good pre-planning is really essential. So in scheduling a visit, here's actually 2 colleagues that are Michigan Partners for Freedom local leaders. Andre Robinson is the gentleman sitting next to Congressman Conyers. And Andre is going to speak at the end of this webinar series, but he's also paired with Janie Vermillion, who is actually also a local leader. And they've both met with Congressman Conyers, talking to him about federal legislation and how it's impacting people with disabilities. So in scheduling a meeting, you got to think about, you've certainly got to plan ahead. Not to be discouraged if you don't receive a prompt response. Don't think that the office isn't, you know, responding to your request or ignoring your request. Oftentimes, you know, there are so many requests that some offices receive, especially in a very high-charged legislative season where there's a lot of bills and passage of documents in front of them. And so you need to be patient, but really do keep at it in terms of trying to schedule, if you're interested in meeting with them face-to-face, to schedule a meeting. I would encourage you, if you do schedule and secure a meeting with a person face-to-face, the legislator, bring your camera. Get a picture with that legislator to meet with them. And if you do meet with the legislator's staff, take a picture with them. Oftentimes, those are really key reminders when you're following up with the legislator or legislative staff to say, hey, I came and met with you a couple weeks ago. This is what we talked about, and let me just send you this quick snapshot just to remind you of kind of our meeting. It might be a good visual reminder of when they met with you. So when scheduling the meeting, if you're calling to schedule a meeting with the legislator or legislative staff, ask for no more than 15 to 20 minutes. Make sure you tell them, the scheduler who's going to be arranging with you that meeting, how many people will be meeting with you. And letting them know if you represent an organization or group and if you are a constituent or not is also really key. The scheduler will probably ask why you're requesting the meeting, if there's a particular piece of legislation or bill that you want to focus on. But if you don't have a particular bill or issue that you want to focus on, you could generally respond with issues important to people with disabilities, or name that specific bill or issue. And then before you get off, or when get off the phone or that appointment is scheduled, make sure you ask who you will be meeting with and what their core responsibilities with. Generally speaking, you'll probably meet with somebody. If it's a more seasoned office, they might have a health policy advisor. If it's a smaller office, which is pretty typical in the Michigan legislature, the staffs are pretty small. There might only be 2 or 3 people, and they probably cover a whole host of issues. And since disability, this is the unique thing about disability issues, is that there's very few things that disability doesn't touch. I mean, most issues have a disability impact. So that variety will be something that will be key, because there's very many pieces of legislation that have a disability impact. So just a reminder, don't be upset if you're not meeting with the legislator themselves. Oftentimes the staff are really essential to prioritizing what is brought before the legislator so that he or she can make a decision about something. And building that relationship with the legislative staff is really an important opportunity for you, because then when things do come up, you can quickly contact them to say, you know, this is of concern to us, or I want to make sure that the legislator is aware of this. So building that relationship both with the legislator and the legislative staff. So just as a brief point, I see here we have a couple questions. I'm going to take a couple of these questions, and Mike's going to help me, and I'm going to just try to address a couple of them. If they're not at this point, I will also be able to send out answers thereafter. So the first question is, will these links to the materials, will the links be on the presentation materials? Yes. We'll make those available at the website thereafter. Okay. And I will make sure that we have them posted to the website. So getting ready for that meeting. First of all, don't be nervous. You've got a lot of knowledge to bring to that meeting. As a person that either receives supports, as a family member of somebody who receives supports, or as a person working in the field, legislators want to hear from you. You understand how a particular bill or issue will impact people that they're voting for, or who will be impacted by a piece of legislation. The other thing is to get with your colleagues and kind of get their perspective, so you can almost anticipate what issues might, that you want to bring to a legislative appointment, so that you can touch upon getting a series of representative perspectives. Also informs that conversation just a bit more. Before contacting legislators, you need to kind of also do some homework. Not just about the legislation, but about the legislator themselves. Do some homework, go on their website, find out what that individual, what their interests are, what are their positions on similar pieces of legislation or proposed laws. Doing that on the website is relatively easy, and also provides you with the opportunity of some background. You might also want to read some recent news articles about the legislator, or what positions he supported in the past, or what he or she has, responsibilities he or she has in the legislature or in Congress, to know whether or not they serve on key committees that affect your particular issue. I'm going to talk a little bit about committees in a second, but I think it's also important to kind of go back to the basics here and to think about how a bill becomes a law. Somebody was about my age and grew up in the time period of Schoolhouse Rock. That's really how I learned how a bill becomes a law, and it really is how I still reference to think about how ideas and issues come up. So really, laws really begin as ideas, first a representative or legislator sponsors a bill. That bill is then sent to a committee for assignment based on what their jurisdiction is. If the bill is released by the committee, meaning that there was a favorable or unfavorable position by that committee, it's then debated by the General Assembly of both either the legislature or Congress of that particular chamber. If it reaches a majority level within that chamber, it moves on to the other chamber. In the U.S. Congress, if it passes both chambers, the president has 10 days to sign a bill into law. In Michigan, that majority rule still also apply, but and our state rules say that the governor has 14 days to sign a bill into law. The key thing is that both chambers have the opportunity to consider that bill, and that discussion happens both at the committee level, which has jurisdiction over that issue, and then also at the General Assembly level of that chamber. So when you're talking, if you're planning to talk to a legislator or about a particular issue, make sure you reference the bill both in name and bill number. And as you can see on the slide here, I've kind of left some general frameworks for how bills are numbered. At the beginning, I gave you the reference point for both the state and federal legislature websites. That's also how you can look up bills, and these will how bills will be numbered from once they're registered in the Congress or the state legislature. They're then assigned a state bill. You'll notice that the lettering is somewhat different in Michigan. The letters will start, if it starts in the Senate, is Senate Bill SB and then the number, and then House Bill HB and then the number. And the Congress, it's a little bit different. U.S. Congress, it'll be just the S and then the numbers, and then in the House, it stands for House of Representatives, so it's HR and then the number. So you can use the federal websites to find that. Also, if there's an advocacy group that you work with and might have some of that information on their website, you can also maybe visit the such as the ARC of Michigan or a local ARC chapter or United Cerebral Palsy of Michigan or Metro Detroit. Whatever local advocacy group you're affiliated with, they might have that particular information at their fingertips as well, and they can share that with you, so you know that you're referencing. So in preparation for your meeting, if you're going to meet with the legislator or your contact, do your research. Research is done the web. The web is such a wealth of knowledge now in terms of getting contacts of who the legislator is, what the content of the bill is, what are some of the positions that some people are taking. If you're going to meet with that person, you might want to practice. And I think some people get shy away from role playing, but when you have 15 or 20 minutes and you're trying to really share a story, practicing how you're going to be concise and whittle down that information is a good opportunity. And as I said earlier, if you're going to be meeting in person, bring a picture, bring a short video to share as well. Prepare for your issues. Do a little research about the particular legislator. This is a picture of Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers. If you didn't do your homework, you wouldn't know that if you were going to meet with her. She's actually a congresswoman from Washington State. She is a parent, obviously. She's got 2 kids there, and one of her children, her son has Down syndrome. So she would have a connection. If you didn't do your homework and know that, you might feel a little awkward if you said, well, as a parent, I know about this, and you didn't, obviously offer that reference to her personal experience. So doing a little bit of homework to find out what that person's background is or what their knowledge is. But also to find out if they're a potential ally, and and if you have to prioritize your efforts to meet with legislators who understand your issues, doing your homework to understand what their knowledge and background about disability is really key, so that you can kind of really put your best effort into people who have some background knowledge, and to share that, what a particular bill might focus on. So one thing in preparing for talking with legislators, you might also need to do some homework and find out which committees they work on and which committees they might be connected with. Knowing whether your issue falls under jurisdiction of a particular committee is important. As I said earlier, proposed legislation will fall under jurisdiction of at least 2 committees, because each committee in both chambers gets to consider the bill, both on the House side and the Senate side, whether it's federal or state. There are a lot of committees. In the U.S. Congress, there are 20 standing committees, 4 joint committees. In the House, there are 20 committees, 1 select committee, and 4 joint committees. Each of these committees has a separate jurisdiction and a separate set of sub-issues. That's a lot of business that can get done. In Michigan, there are 23 House committees and 22 standing committees. Given the number of committees and the number of legislators, it's obvious that most legislators will serve on more than 1 committee. Not always, but most. But you do need to find out, when advocating for a particular policy, whether that legislation will fall under a jurisdiction of a committee that your legislator or who you're reaching out to has oversight on. An example that I'll use is that sometimes the names of the committees can be misleading. So for example, this is the Senate Finance Committee membership. Senate Finance Committee is pretty powerful. They have a lot of key issues. The name of the Finance Committee would assume that it has to do with anything that has to do with money. Well, that is true, but if you did a little bit of homework about the Finance Committee, you would discover that one of the key issues of the Senate Finance Committee is, if you look at this hyperlink number 5, health programs under the Social Security Act and programs financed by a specific tax or trust fund. What that means and why that's important is that's Medicaid. So when issues come up about Medicaid financing or Medicaid rules, and most recently the Affordable Care Act, which fell under the jurisdiction of the Finance Committee, it's really key to know where your issue comes up. I think most people would assume or presume, if they were looking at the list of committees, that if you were just looking at the list, the Senate Health Committee is where most folks would assume Medicaid financing or structure would fall under. It also falls under the Senate HELP Committee, which stands for, HELP is the acronym, it stands for Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. But when it comes to finance or structures of Medicaid, that falls under the Senate Finance Committee. Another example, most recently where actually Senator Stabenow was involved, was the Farm Bill. She is the Senate chairperson for the Senate Agricultural Committee. Well, what big thing came out of the Senate Farm Bill this past year was the food stamp program. And if knowing that, presumably most people would assume that that would fall under the jurisdiction of the Health Committee, but it's where the bill gets paired up. So if you wanted to advocate for better, actually reduction, the food stamp program was reduced on this most recent farm bill. So there was a lot of advocacy that needed to happen in the Senate Agricultural Committee. So it also shows how much influence a legislator might have on a particular issue if it falls under their committee's jurisdiction. So when meeting with or communicating with your legislators, it's important to prepare your message, prepare your materials. Find out what statistics you can use to support the message. This graph on the right, this graph that looks at day, work, and supported employment, is for Michigan. It shows kind of where we are in terms of supporting people in supported employment. It's pretty weak right now in terms of the number of people that are with disabilities that are supported in supported employment. As compared to our total expenditures of who's involved in supported work. This is a document or a graph from the State of the State in Developmental Disabilities, which is a pretty well-known national publication that's produced annually to report how all states are doing and how the federal government is doing supporting people with disabilities. It might be a good resource when you're meeting with people, legislators, trying to make your point and enumerate your position or lack of supports for a particular issue. The infographic on the left is something that was produced to really give some visual appeal to what disability looks like in America. Knowing how many people a particular issue affects is really important. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need to create these and I couldn't, these beautiful graphics, but there are documents that are out there, even using the web, to borrow or to use, that are good examples when communicating with your legislator, and always reference the source, or if you want to find actual numbers to make your case. And then also the one key thing that I always find with statistics is compare and contrast with others, and that's why the State of the States report is annually produced and why it's so important, because it compares Michigan to other states. Legislators are competitive. I mean, all Americans, want to be the top of the top amongst our states and amongst other countries. But even within states, our community wants to be, be the best at whatever it can, whatever a particular issue is. So sometimes using that competitive spirit to strive to encourage action is also an opportunity for advocacy. In Michigan, we have the prepaid health programs and community mental health programs that are funded under our Medicaid system. These are Medicaid program, and as with all states, is a joint program of agreement with both federal funds that are operated under agreements with the states. Recently in Michigan, our governor had asked a commission to be convened by executive order to think about how our state could improve its mental health system. That commission had a series of meetings and public meetings over the last year, and then in the beginning of this year released this public report. This is a report that you can actually download and read. These are the overarching recommendations of the report. But it also was an opportunity for some people last year to share their experiences of how they might want our mental health system to improve. So we talk about legislative advocacy, but there's also advocacy that doesn't have to deal directly with legislation, but can be an opportunity for you or for others to be involved in shaping how a particular program is shaped or what improvements might happen. So think about or consider those as opportunities as well, not just talking specifically with legislators about legislation, but I also mentioned this report in that it could be a good resource. We just talked about how to use statistics to make your case or to help you advocate your position, but this report might be also a tool that you might use or reference when you are communicating with the legislators. If you haven't seen this report, it's available online at the state's website, and I will put the hyperlink up there and with all the other websites that we've mentioned, and you can download it as well. Another resource that I'll suggest to you is the Disability Policy Seminar is an annual policy meeting that is convened in DC, and several Michigan representatives from Michigan disability groups went last week. We were actually just there last week. As part of that seminar, we all kind of get trained on how to talk about particular pieces of legislation and then collectively go up to the Hill on what is called a Hill Day and schedule a series of meetings with our Michigan delegation. This is an example of a recent fact sheet from that meeting. The great thing about it is that these are considered tools for the public to use to advocate for policies that enhance the lives of people with disabilities and their families. This is on the federal proposed legislation of, it's called the ABLE Act. It's the acronym it's referred to, but it's Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. There's two companion pieces of legislation that are referenced in here in the background, Senate Bill 313 and HR 647. Both these bills are moving along and getting a lot of sponsorship and co-sponsorship from both members in the House and Senate. You can use these materials to kind of give background information about the issue. Some key elements, as you see who it's benefiting, is the eligibility section, and then the key piece at the back is the recommendation. This is actually a double-sided document. The other thing that's really helpful is this document also shows what committees this bill would fall under in terms of jurisdiction. So it does a lot of the work for you, and it's very helpful. I'm going to click on this document and take you to the website because you can download these. Are public documents. There is a series of fact sheets on a number of issues, as you see right here. the ABLE Act, the Affordable Care Act, autism, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that's what's referenced here in civil rights, and so on and so forth. So that's a resource that you might want to use for meetings that you might have with federal legislators. These are federal documents because obviously this is a conference that was a national seminar, but if you're meeting with federal legislators, it is a great opportunity. And at that meeting last week, this is my friend Tia, and she actually got the opportunity to introduce Senator Harkin. Senator Harkin is the chair of the Senate Help Committee. He had come and addressed the seminar last week. Senator Harkin, and if you don't know, is from Iowa. He's a Democrat. He's also a sibling of a person who is deaf and hard of hearing. So Senator Harkin has been a long champion, helped to really shape the Americans with Disabilities Act alongside Senator Ted Kennedy. So he's been a long champion of people with disabilities and their families. So after meeting with a legislator or legislative staff, make sure you do the courteous thing of sending a thank you note. It takes just a brief moment. It doesn't have to be an actual paper note. You can send a quick email. And that follow-up is really important, particularly if there's something that you talked about during the meeting that you promised to get as additional follow-up information, or if there is something that, a question that was brought up that you would get back to the legislative staff or legislator about. So also when you're meeting with them or afterwards, invite the legislator, start to build a relationship with that legislator. Invite them to your organization. Invite them to attend an event that you're sponsoring so they can see firsthand the people's lives that particular issue might be impacting. It's much harder to, take a stance without any connection to a particular issue when there's not a personal person to attach that issue to. So follow up with legislators, say thank you, and invite them and continue to build that relationship. The other thing I might suggest that requires little effort on your part, this is to join the listservs of legislators. Practically every legislator has an e-listserv. This is for my senator. I live in the 13th District of Michigan Senate District, and my legislator sends out this email every month. It's also available online. The thing that I always look for in this document is the office hours. Of course, state legislators have offices in Lansing, but those are often not the most reasonable way to reach out and with our busy schedules to try to meet with legislators. So most of them have office hours in their actual district. And for Senator Papa George, he has them on a standing Saturday, so you can always plan ahead. Same location, same schedule each time. So think about that when you're trying to schedule a meeting. It doesn't have to be in Lansing, or it doesn't have to be in DC. There's often opportunities in the district where that person represents to meet with them, and most times that legislator has them in non-9 to 5 hours, so they're either on the weekends or in the evenings, so that they can accommodate a variety of work schedules and constituents can be accommodated. The other thing that I also just suggest is to join that legislator's Facebook page, or if they're really high-tech, they also have Twitter, and they really follow that information. That is the quickest way to get an issue or position known to a legislator. Those things are regularly monitored, and especially in this fast-paced world of decision-making, really key to having a quick impact. The other thing you can do is if you're in Michigan and you want to testify, you can consider testifying before a legislative committee or session. Or if you're in your local politics involved with local legislation, the county commission. Depending on something is being considered at which level and the relevancy, you can ask to testify at a committee meeting or hearing. And if you're doing so, you need to do that through the clerk's office or the committee record, the committee office at the state legislature. It's a little bit harder to, at the federal level, those are usually invited. People are invited to testify, but in the state and local level, it's quite easy to insert yourself and make sure that you're heard by a full committee or policy group. So consider that as an example. Here's a picture of Zachary Lassiter from Kalamazoo, Rick, testifying before the Health Policy Committee, and this was at the time that the autism legislation was being considered, so it was a pretty relevant for his experiences of being a, you know, and having how that would impact people in his community that experience autism. So just to summarize some of the things we've talked about today, I know we've talked about a lot of things. First of all, you know you can make a difference in policy. Talk with legislative officials. This is the Marquette Rick meeting with their legislator, and they got right down on the floor and took a big picture, and you can see how happy the legislator is. So he knows who his constituency is. Make sure that you contact your officials regularly and make sure that your voice is heard. However you do that, email, mail, fax, certainly the social media mechanisms, and make sure many of your ideas are heard by using all these methods. Don't just use one, you can use more than one method. Do your homework, find out what the legislator's background is, find out what their position is and maybe what they've taken in other positions. If you're going to be talking about a specific bill, know the bill number and the bill name. And when meeting with the legislator in person, if you're going with your group, you know, organize yourself so that you're maximizing the brief time you might have with that legislator. And prepare by bringing a key, concise list of information, some research, some statistics, some pictures or examples, personal examples, so that those can be shared in that meeting. In preparation for that meeting, you know, of course, you got to schedule in advance and let the staff know what you're going to be coming to talk about, who's going to be coming with you, and then do some work and prepare. Role play, practice, prioritize your points. Just remember, it's not who you meet with as much as how much contact and content and input you give to that person. So it doesn't have to be the legislator themselves that you meet with in order to have your message be known. You can meet with legislative staff. They're very key in getting issues addressed and prioritized within an office. And then, of course, after you meet with the legislator or have that, you know, contact, follow up. You know, get information that you promised to follow up and or share. Send a thank you note, and then arrange for how that relationship is going to continue to build. So keep contact with that legislator or representative. And then lastly, I just also want to say, right now, I mentioned earlier the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is a piece of that's being considered by the U.S. Senate right now, and I can't emphasize enough how personal experience can impact. This picture right here is an example of two individuals who experience disabilities at different points in their life. And these are both legislators. Tammy Duckworth is the legislator who is sitting in the wheelchair on the left, who is talking with Senator Kirk from Illinois. And both of them had acquired disabilities at different ways in their life and can speak directly. And actually, they're talking to their colleagues and how ratifying the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will impact their lives and on the lives of citizens they represent. So having that direct experience and getting that background knowledge is really key so that you can emphasize personal experience, but also how that legislator might have a direct experience and the information that you might be discussing. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to see if there are any outstanding questions that we might have at this point. I can't read this. Oh, okay. So we have just a few minutes left. If there's any questions that people would like to pose in the chat box, they can pose those questions in the bottom of the chat box. Okay, seeing none, and of course not, I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth, who's going to conclude and chat with you about the homework assignment. This is my contact information if you need to reach me or ask for questions. As I said earlier, we'll make sure all the websites are available to you and the associated hyperlinks. And I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth so she can tell you about the homework assignment, which will be sent out to you.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to just review the homework assignment, and I also want to thank Angela for doing an exemplary job. It was very informational, and I hope you all got a lot out of the information and will use it readily. The homework assignment, I need to bring it up so I can review it with you. It was designed so you should be able to complete it fairly quickly, and it gets to some of the things that Angela discussed today that will help you be a more effective legislative advocate. And I'd like to say too that when you complete this, if you choose to write it out, please write it in pen and write very legibly for me. I had just a couple of people this week that did assignments that I had a great deal of difficulty reading, and when you're faxing them in, it becomes even kind of more difficult to read them if they are in you know, pencil. So again, if you're going to print it out, please print very legibly and clearly and use a black or a blue ink pen. Thank you. All right, this is the week 7 webinar homework assignment. Please put your name at the top so you can get full credit, the date you complete it, and of course the date should not be any further advanced than Tuesday's date. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure of that date right now, but it's Tuesday, 5 p.m. I need these by, okay? What is your mailing address? Put your mailing address or your work address in that line, okay? And what city it is and your zip code. Who is your state senator and representative? And then you can, you know, if you know, great, you put that in there, and the district number, okay? Your state representative, complete that line, and the district number. And Angela did give you the information on how to get all that. If you don't know, if you don't know right now, she did give you how to research that and fill that out. And I believe that's probably part of the process too. Who's your United States congressional representative? Please put the representative there and the district number. Who are Michigan's United States senators? Who's the senior senator? Who's the junior senator? Please submit it on Tuesday, April 22nd, again by 5. Right? You can fax it in at the number below. You can email them to the email address listed there on your assignment as well. Okay, if you have a problem, you can also email the answers or scan it in. Scan it to me at e.jenks@wayne.edu. All right, so thank you very much for listening in today, and I hope you all found it very educational. And thank you, special thanks to Michael Bray and to Angela Martin, our presenter today. We'll tune in again next week. Thank you.